Hi, morning, Rob. Good to see you.
Morning.
All right, Rob, we're going to talk about sleep recovery. But first of all, I'm going to ask you to talk about the risks of
Hmm.
poor sleep. You are the sleep genius. You explain to us why we should care about the risks of poor sleep.
Well, here's the thing. All right. I want to be realistic, right? Because how many sleep scientists and these nerds that are in the lab and they come out and they say, you should get better sleep. You should go to bed on time. Turn off the blue light. Reduce your caffeine to the point where we're all sick of it, right? The reality is life is tough, and there are going to be times when if you want to be successful, you have to sleep deprive. Now, I'm not saying that that is the go-to. That's not what we should be doing. So, first of all, I just want to accept that this is part of life. Sometimes we don't get the sleep that we want. Sometimes we have bouts of insomnia. In fact, there's a relatively high percentage of people that will have insomnia at some point in their life. So, with that said, you are accepted as a perfect, imperfect human being. We know that sleep is not always going to be perfect, but if given the opportunity, I want to share some ways that we can get better sleep because if you don't get good sleep, the risk of making a mistake is very high. Now, if you're in military or first response, the risk could be lethal. If you're think about a police officer who's working shift work and he's super tired and he's in a threat situation and all of a sudden he's got his gun drawn and his finger is on the trigger, the cognitive performance of an individual who is sleep deprived can be measured on a blood alcohol equivalency scale. So if you're sleep deprived, you might as well be drunk. And so making the decision to take someone's life or handle the situation differently is drastically changed when you're impaired from sleep deprivation. And that's only, the first order effect. When you start to have extended sleep deprivation, now you become emotionally unstable. Spouses report this first. You're like, gee, Bob is really just not easy to get along with these days, right? He's so grumpy, right? Well, that's because you're not able to emotionally process during the dream space, or you're not able to fully recover, or your hormones are disrupted because your sleep cycles are disrupted. And that doesn't feel good at all. And so then we start to look at, third order effects of, all cause mortality is impacted by sleep health. Cancer, hypertension, heart disease, you name it, almost everything is affected by sleep. So what do we do? Well, the we don't want to be the negative Nancy saying, you need to change your life, you need to be better. We want to accept everybody exactly where they're at in life, but there are some things that we can start to do to reduce some of that risk because life is short. We only have one life. We want the best quality life possible, and you're not going to get that if you're sleep deprived.
Yeah. All right. So thank you, Rob. So before we get into how we mitigate those risks, let's talk about you. So you are the sleep genius. Explain to us your life story and how you came to be an expert in sleep.
Yeah, I'm still shy with that word sleep genius. I didn't come up with that name. When somebody called me that the first time, I was like, nah, that's too bravado, right? That's too hubris. How could I possibly say that about myself? But it turns out that it's catchy and people like it, so it stuck. But my journey didn't start as a sleep genius. It actually started as a sleep idiot, a sleep imbecile, right? Because in the SEAL teams, we are forced to stay awake for nearly a week in training. Now, I can't underscore how detrimental that is to our mental health and our long-term stability. It brings you into a place of psychosis that you can revisit. I think that in years to come, we'll better understand the impact of what we're doing to ourselves. But needless to say, staying awake for a week is not good. And if you have stayed up that long, there's this weird thing that makes you think that you can stay up like that again in the future. It's like, it's just 2 days. I've stayed up for 5.5 days before. And then you start to normalize sleep deprivation. And sometimes willfully sleep deprived because then it turns into an egotistical badge of honor. It's like, I don't need sleep. I can go on a mission after a mission after a mission. I don't need any sleep. If you need sleep, you're weak, right? And so we start to judge each other. And it's very much present in, it's not just the SEAL teams, it's in any male dominant sort of performance based thing. You start to see this type of behavior, definitely in fire service and first response, other military units. But at the time, I didn't know anything. I didn't know any of this. All you know is put out or get out, right? You have to perform. You have to meet the standard, and it's not going to be easy. And you're going to give almost everything to be able to accomplish the goal of putting on a trident, becoming a Navy SEAL, and having the fortune to go on missions, right? So then fast forward. You go on missions, you see death, you see chaos, you see war. You realize that it's not a pretty picture like you saw in the movie Charlie Sheen Navy SEALs. It's actually not that cool. And there's nothing beautiful or pretty about war at all. And so for me personally, I grew a little bit of disdain and a little bit of trauma related anxiety. I took on some physical injuries. And I'm nearing sort of the end of my career. You know, I'm getting banged up in the SEAL teams, and it's time for me. I'm done. And then at that time, something powerful happened. In 2017, one of my platoon mates had similar injuries and was struggling with sleep and struggling with what we call traumatic brain injury. We have all this blast exposure. We're always blowing stuff up and shooting big guns, and it rattles our brain. And then in 2017, he took his life. He hung himself in his parents' basement. He was at home at his dad's house, and his dad came home and found him like that. And so, yes, this definitely impacted all of us, but more importantly, I just couldn't live with the fact that this is just such a devastating situation and that there's nothing good that can come out of this. My perspective was, yes, I did spiral into a little bit of depression at the thought of him swinging from the rafters. But I thought, what can I do? How can I stop this from happening with other people? I can't save Ryan, but maybe I can save people like him. And so I thought about what is the problem that I can solve here? And that began my career into sleep science. And with a very fiery passion for saving somebody like Ryan, with his thought in mind, I forged the way blindly, going into the abyss of misinformation, of medical, whoever owns the money owns the marketing, and all of the crap that gets put out there, all of the lies, the deceit, the emphasis on drugs and devices and surgeries like these capitalistic models that push people into treatment protocols that they may not need, right? And I'm not taking anything away from true medical situations where those things need to be addressed, but 99% of the challenges that we have with sleep in day-to-day life come from behavioral mechanisms or nutrition or scheduling or blue light exposure, all these things. And so over the course of nearly a decade, I've gone on to give my life to sleep science. I've written a book about it. I created a program. I've put people through the program. We've graduated hundreds of people through this rigorous program, impacting thousands of lives. Now I'm training other coaches to do what I do. And along the way, that name, Sleep Genius, came from Jared Arnold at the SEAL Future Foundation. We co-sponsored a cohort. I helped basically a platoon of Navy SEALs. And for the first time, I felt like after years of trying to help people in sleep, I had come full circle and I finally helped guys like Ryan, other Navy SEALs. So that I was very emotional after completing that, graduating those guys. And it was really a hallmark moment in my life. And after that, Jared called me, "Hey man, you're the sleep genius." And I thought to myself, like, nah, that's crazy. But it stuck. Now I have the Sleep Genius branding. Now I fly all over the world and talk about sleep. I help corporations and organizations. And I just want to talk about the reality of we actually do have more control than the media wants us to believe. We can sleep good at night. We can lead a good life. It might take a little bit of discipline, but it definitely does not require a pill.
Yeah, all positive stuff. Thank you, Rob. So let's segue into the next segment by just delving into some of those risks. So in this channel, we are the risky scientists. So we like to define, specify these risks. So let's start with the suicide risk, which is I can appreciate is a sensitive one and one we can relate to, particularly in the military context. Veteran suicide is unfortunately very high, and we often talk about it. When I've heard you talk before about the relationship between sleep and suicide, um, there are two things going on, and you correct me if I'm wrong. You explain the depth of this. So one way that the audience might appreciate is that you're making bad decisions when you're sleep deprived, and one extremely bad decision might be to kill yourself. But I think I've heard you say there's also the second way relationship, which is more depressive. So lack of sleep will lead to depression and other psychological effects, which then encourage. That's maybe the wrong word, but lead manifest collectively towards suicide. So can you explain that risk for us?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, we just don't have any solutions for suicide. So I want to say that up front. The VA is nearing $1 trillion in monetary output to try to solve the veteran suicide problem. They've made no progress. And I'm not saying they haven't saved people, but I'm saying that we just don't have a solution for suicide. Every single person is different. Everyone reaches that point for different reasons. Everyone's life situation is different. And we wish that we had a code. We wish we had some way to solve this and figure it out, but we just don't. And so, is it really even fully understood? I don't know. But what I do know is that when we don't get good sleep, we become emotionally unstable, right? It begins as a little bit of irritability, right? You're late for work, you're tired, you're worn out, the kids are yelling, you have coworkers, like you're stressed out. Being able to process stress is a direct process, a function of sleep. Now, there is managing general stress throughout the day, which exercise, nutrition, breath work, mindfulness, these things do help. But a lot of things get sort of just automatically processed during sleep. And so, if you're not getting good sleep, what will begin to happen is it'll compound, right? You're not feeling like you're able to get that stress off your shoulders. You're not able to fully process. And if you're not able to fully process the stress of the day, it bleeds into the next day and into the next day and into the next day. And then at some point you may choose to reach for alcohol or marijuana or some type of a crutch to sort of shift away the pressure of the stress. When we get into more complex trauma, these things can cause an echo in your memory that comes up throughout the day or comes up in the form of night terrors. And it's my belief, we have an entire field of psychology that has their own perspective. And to some degree, I agree with their perspective. But when you have books like the DSM-5, the Diagnostic Manual for Mental Health, and a lot of those result in a pill, I just can't agree with that, right? And so when we take accountability for our own thoughts, our own actions, our own traumas, and think about like how can we process this, a lot of things come up. For example, if you're a Christian, you're going to lean into prayer, and perhaps you have a very rigid belief structure on how you should manage these things. But from my side of the house, what I see most of is if you're not able to dream if you're not able to get into that REM sleep, um, you're not going to be able to process or metabolize these traumas. What I found, and it's very difficult to prove these types of things. You can't set up a study and control enough variables to prove any of this, right? But if you go into the dream world and you're able to face your trauma head on, very different than exposure therapy. This is within you dissolve the space-time continuum and you go into the dream world, which has very different boundaries, and you're able to face these traumas within that space. It becomes a sandbox. It becomes a space where you can process these things in somewhat of a safe environment. And then when you wake up, there's a lot of caveats to that, but I won't go into detail on that. That gets a little bit weird. But when we wake up and we're back into the space-time continuum, this linear thing that we experience as life, birth and death and everything in between, now it doesn't come up as a echo that constantly is bearing down on us. And so that's really the description of PTSD. And I believe that that's the best way to resolve it. There's lots of other ways to resolve it. Everything from equestrian therapy to, I know a lot of people have seen success with plant-based medicines, all kinds of therapy and exercise, and jujitsu is a great output for that stress. But getting back to the effects of poor sleep, it is a slippery slope. And when I look at Ryan Larkin, what I observed was not only a process of the trauma affecting, increasing anxiety, and then anxiety causing poor sleep or restlessness, and then poor sleep causing emotional instability, and then sort of unstableness throughout the day. And then what does the Navy do? They start medicating, right? Medicating for PTSD. And then what happens after that? Now we've got the option of taking some Ambien, right? And the Navy kind of gives out Ambien at times, um, pretty openly. And so then we have, okay, well, now we're taking Ambien, which we all know puts you to sleep faster, not by much, but by a little bit. But now you've put a sedative into your system and it affects the quality of your sleep. So now you're getting not as good of sleep as you were before, or potentially could without the drug. And then you wake up feeling half-mast, not fully rested. And then what do? You reach for stimulants. And so this vicious cycle of sedatives and stimulants, I observe with Ryan and I observe with lots and lots of people. You don't have to be in the military to get stuck in this. And then sleep continues to degrade. And what I observed of Ryan and kind of putting the pieces together on this suicide problem is that as your mental health starts to go downhill, and then your behavioral health makes the mental health even worse, and your sleep health is not helping you recover, is becoming part of the problem, then all of a sudden things start to get fuzzy. You become emotionally unstable. You begin to question life and reality. And it is very potential that, it's tough to say whether it's a chicken or the egg, but when we see very poor sleep health, we typically see very poor mental health. And it absolutely increases the risk of potentially ending your life. And so for good mental health, you got to get good sleep. And so if you have some things that are bothering you in mental health, and it's affecting your sleep, well, how do you get good sleep if that's affecting your sleep? And if I need good sleep to get better mental health, but I can't get good sleep because I have poor mental health or something's bothering me, we had a death in the family or whatever, what do we do? And so sometimes it takes drastic measures, but it absolutely is a bi-directional relationship that we have to take responsibility for. And if we're able to accomplish good sleep, most likely the mental health will begin to resolve itself in most situations.
Yeah, I got you. So you said an interesting sentence just a few sentences ago. You said you don't have to be in the military to get stuck in this, and I think we should, in terms of risk exposure, we should um, we should make clear that you don't have to you don't have to be in the extreme. You don't have to be exposed to sort of extreme risks we've talked about so far, such as war. You don't have to be physically injured in extreme ways, like traumatic brain injury, to get into to get stuck in the sort of situations that you're talking about. Um, and what I'd like you to just explain, if you can, is how easily one can get traumatized by unconsciously, unmindfully. You can actually get traumatized by events that you're not aware you're getting traumatized by, and then that spoils your sleep. And mindfulness is sort of uh, often difficult to collect in a person when there's so many other things to worry about. So, do you have any examples from any of your patients or um, maybe your studies of how easily it is for sleep to get disturbed in ways that retrospectively seem obvious to the patient, but at the time can be dismissed by the patient as trivial or weak or that not that couldn't possibly be significant enough to be affecting my sleep right now.
Yeah. Yeah, that is quite the question, Bruce. So I would say that in my experience, um, everyone perceives the world differently. And our perception of risk is never fully in alignment with the true probability of risk. And so if you have a higher appetite or aptitude or, you know, potential for managing risk or high risk situations or high speed, missions that we are on, just because we are impacted by, for example, if a Navy SEAL goes into combat and sees a bunch of death, that person may not be traumatized or affected as much as a person of a different mindset and background and had a different childhood who sees a small dog get kicked, right? And so the way that we perceive the waking world and the way that we experience trauma is unique to each one of us. And the way that the brain perceives trauma is sort of binary, right? If we perceive trauma, it impacts our brain. The actual event is going to affect everyone differently, right? And so I think one of the challenges with the culture in America in trying to protect everyone and provide an easy lifestyle and sort of oftentimes put kids in a bubble and give them whatever they want or sort of cater to the child's desires is that they are faced with less adversity and there's less emotional development in terms of resilience. And so as they become adults, something very small could be very traumatic to them. And it's not to judge their trauma. How they perceive that trauma, the brain is being affected the same way as the Navy SEAL who's experiencing trauma in what we would consider, a legitimate traumatic situation. So everyone's perception is at the core of this, right? How you perceive the world, how you're experiencing these things. In fact, you could have two combat veterans on a mission together and they see their buddy blown up, and one can experience recurring traumatic thoughts from that, and the other one didn't affect him at all. And so it is a bit of a weird paradigm. So to sort of answer your question, um, we have PTSD, which I'm in partial disagreement with the diagnosis, and it's heavily, focused on the VA's perspective of PTSD, which is our Veterans Affairs for all military as they transition. But then I think it's if we just use that term PTSD and then we start to break it down into, well, are people actually experiencing PTSD or is it sort of a micro PTSD? I think that it's a valid argument for micro PTSD. For example, in this last election, we had people that felt very strongly in one way and then people that felt very strongly in another way. And the level of tension and sort of the impact of the election and the decisions and all the different elements of that absolutely caused trauma in everyday people. In fact, I would argue that there is a very high prevalence of micro trauma across the entire country based on sort of the strong divide between these two parties. And ultimately, it's just a shame. It's a shame that people are experiencing that. Now, no one is to blame, right? This is life. This just is the way it is. But when we experience that trauma, it's absolutely going to affect our sleep. And that there is a bit of sort of dealing with it that we can take on board. There is a level of accountability that we can take on for the traumas that we experience. Because here's the truth, Bruce. Life is about suffering. It's also about joy and love and everything that God has provided for us, but there is an element of suffering. And oftentimes the suffering, there's different types of suffering, but like the suffering comes from a desire to cling to something. And a human will suffer 1,000 times over for one thing that they did. Whereas you look in the animal kingdom, and that's just not something that happens. Like they experience trauma and they shake it off and they move on. But we're different as humans. We're very much in our head, and we let something bother us potentially for the rest of our lives. So there is a degree of responsibility that we have the ability to take on accountability for the traumas and the stresses that we encounter because you are going to experience trauma. You are going to have issues in your life. There's going to be, endless suffering, but do we allow that to consume us? Do we allow that to continue? And if we experience trauma, especially something like a death in the family or losing an animal, this can definitely impact our sleep. It's sad, it's depressing, but we actually choose how we continue to perceive this memory because there is only one now. That is the present. And everything in the past becomes a memory. And in fact, everyone's memory of the exact same experience, the same event, is different. And as time goes on, it morphs and it changes, and you have the choice on how you process that and how you address that. Now, I know that you eat very well, Bruce. You take care of your nutrition. If you're not taking care of your nutrition, which admittedly is difficult in the United States, we've allowed the food industry to just completely overwhelm us with ultra high processed foods. But if you keep your nutrition dialed in, if you take care of yourself in terms of exercise, and if you have a disability, do the exercises that you can do. Insofar as just trying breath work to start with, figuring out a way to get your blood, your heart rate up. These things can be tremendously helpful. Then, and only then, can we get into sleep science, which is how are you structuring your day? What type of thoughts are you allowing in your mind? We do have control over these things, right? But if we don't even address them and we say, yeah, I'm just going to eat fast food. No, I'm not going to work out. I'm just going to let the stress of life get to me, and I'm just going to go to bed whenever because I'm going to stay on, TikTok and Zoom left and right with the blue light in my eyes or whatever. What do you think the result is going to be? So, of course, we're all going to have trauma. We're all going to have sleepless nights, and these things happen. But the perpetuation of that becomes a problem that is solvable, and ultimately, we do have to take responsibility for that.
Yeah, I got you. So we're now talking about ways to control these risks, and you're very articulate in how you do this. Now we're going to get into your book and what readers can get out of the book that will help them with their sleep. Just before we get there, now when you're talking about all these different ways that you can restore your sleep or improve your sleep, you've actually got a number of different sources, cultural sources, non-scientific sources, as well as scientific sources for how you've developed your own thinking about sleep. So finish your story about where you went to, the exotic places you went to learn about sleep.
Science is such a funny word, right? We love science. I'm a sleep scientist. We seek out patterns and things that we can reproduce and prove and find modalities that are common to all humans. But the truth is, sleep and the dream space and all of this becomes very fuzzy, right? I'm not quite sure that we fully understand reality, right? It very much is contained within our perception, and it's different for everybody. And what I've seen in my life is that there are multiple dimensions of existence, and a lot of people have experienced different dimensions or different realms of reality. But I would say most people stay within what they believe to be their true reality, which is just base level perception, right? We don't even acknowledge that there's a delay in the time that our eyeballs, our sensors are picking up the external environment and the time it takes for our brain to process the environment, and that most of that is sort of made up in our brain, and so our perception is very much guided and shaped by our cultural background, our religious background. Everything that we believe to be true shapes our reality. And so, how in the world can you apply the scientific method to such a nebulous topic? And, psychology has been trying to do it, sleep science has been trying to do it. But the truth is, when we start to broach into spirituality, science is left at the door because there is no way to measure spirituality. There is no way to measure, we don't have tools to measure these things outside of our basic perception. The tools that we have are basically just a refined way to perceive that which we already perceive. Things that we're not really fully aware of, we haven't begun to create tools to try to measure that. And what's the point of measuring them anyways? The scientific method is to have reproducible results. So that means we have to have accurate tools. That means we have to isolate one variable and test it. All things have to be constant, or we have, if there's too many variables, then we have to look at what other potential factors could be affecting the outcome. And so the scientific method is really difficult to apply that to a lot of these situations. I very much think that the life continuum of mental health and sleep health absolutely touches on spiritual health. Whether you're atheist, agnostic, or devout, religious, there's going to be a level of spirituality for every person. No matter how much you deny it, that becomes your modality. Now you are the denier, and that is your mode of spiritual reckoning. And so the reason I preface my statement with that is that um, when the science can only take you so far, right? And then when you have science and a modality, it starts to get structured into a business model here in the United States. And then once the business model takes over, now the marketing is taken over, now the education is shaped and changed. And the things that we learn are based on the profit models to some degree. I know there is some beautiful, sanctity within the research community, and it absolutely, they're doing their best to try to prove out things. But it's almost like dissecting a frog, right? We've all dissected a frog in biology class. Actually, I don't even know if they do that anymore in schools, but imagine that you're working at a morgue and you dissect a human being, and you are able to take account of every organ, every part of that body, and you can actually identify the cause of death. You can say this person's had cirrhosis of the liver. It's obvious when you look at the liver, their liver was failing and it caused all kinds of problems in their body, and that is the cause of death. But the truth is, no matter how much you apply science and record and dissect and analyze, you're never going to know who that person was. And that is the point that I'm trying to make, is that there's a whole nother realm that science can't touch on. And so, in trying to figure out the solution to sleep and mental health and the nightmare of thinking of Ryan committing suicide, I wanted to get outside of the laboratory, outside of science, outside of the textbooks, which are very relevant and a core function to what I do. But what else is there? And that took me down to the Amazon, where I met with shamans who have never experienced science in the way that we teach it in the United States. They have a tradition and a thinking and a modality and a spiritual connection that goes back thousands of years, is passed down through the generations. And I just wanted to sit with them and learn from their wisdom. What is a different perspective on life and reality, on spirituality and well-being? Why is it that every first world country is struggling with sleep health, but you don't really see that in areas that aren't so smart and refined, right? Then I traveled into India and I went into the Himalayan mountains to an ashram on the Ganga River, also known as the Ganges, also known as Ma Ganga. It's a very historical and spiritual river. And I stayed at an ashram there with the swamis, learning from their wisdom. What did they have to offer on the continuum of life? And that brought me up to a place called Gangotri, which is the mouth of the Ganges River, which is an incredibly spiritual site where people have spent their entire lives living in caves, crawling out to pray to the river and pray to God and just live in absolute reflection on life in sort of monkhood, right? And it really was powerful. It changed my perspective on things because the United States, first world country, scientific capital of the world, is painting a picture of this is how it should be. Meanwhile, mental health has still continued to get worse. We have more prescriptions than we've ever had, and yet mental health in our country continues to get worse. Same thing with sleep health. So there must be an answer outside of our model. What did Einstein say? You can't solve the problem that you created with the same thinking. Um, and that's where my head was at. It's like there has to be more. And what I found was that there is a whole lot more, and it doesn't necessarily have to fall on science. It can fall on the individual's well-being and perception of themselves. And there are things that we can do to make our life better. Like in the mountains of the Himalayas, we went all the way close to Tibet. Like there are techniques of breathing, right, that will change your life. It's incredible. This is what Wim Hof brought back, the Iceman. He teaches these breathing techniques. I experienced a lot of those same techniques. There's things that have been going on for thousands of years, long before the FDA was created, that works for people to help them get into a balance, right, in their life. And so I did seek for many years trying to find answers that were both homeopathic but also effective for all humans and didn't necessarily put you on a subscription plan or on a pharmaceutical prescription. And I did find those things. I have implemented those things, and those things are hallmark in the success that I've had with people. I'll finish this thought by just saying I still and always will be just a novice. I'm a student of life and reality and humanity. And yeah, I've gained a lot of wisdom out there, but it's still just the tip of the iceberg. I don't have everything figured out. I've been able to help a lot of people with sleep, but I still have a lot to learn. And I'm happy to learn from other sleep scientists. You yourself, Bruce, I want to continue being that learner.
All right, Rob. So we're going to shift. There's a nice segue here. So we're going to talk about 62 Romeo. So this is the swim team T-shirt for Navy SEAL Challenge 2025. I was honored to join you on that team this year. So 62 Romeo, and then the book is 62 Romeo, and everything is branded 62 Romeo. First of all, quickly explain to us what 62 Romeo is.
62 Romeo. Well, 62R, that's what it says right here. That's just because in the military we use acronyms. And when we created 6 weeks to sleep restoration, right? I went on the podcast, the Scuttlebutt Show, and he read 62R, the acronym we created because we are too lazy to type it out in emails. He read that as 62 Romeo. And that's the military alphanumeric way to sort of read that. And I almost corrected him and I said, yeah, that sounds great because it sounded better than what we already had. And so that name stuck. And in fact, 6 weeks to sleep recovery is a word that you said in New York City versus restoration. And I thought I'm going to correct him And then I thought, that actually sounds better. So
I
six
remember
weeks
that.
to sleep
Yeah.
recovery. Yeah. I didn't say anything. I said, in my mind, I'm like, wow, that sounds better. So 6-2R, whatever it is, it's all about sleep. And so here we have the latest and greatest logo. We've got the trident on the top, which is the Navy SEAL. You'll see it here on my chest as well. I've got it on the wall in my podcast studio here. And then we have fire service, EMS, and police. This is representing all the parts of first responders. And there are other first responders out there, but those are the primary ones. And so when we open up this book and we look at it, 6 weeks to sleep restoration. I guess we're gonna have to keep it there for a little while. We'll change it in the next version. It gives an introduction. It gives the story of Ryan Larkin. It begins by saying there was a time when Ryan Larkin was unstoppable. A Navy SEAL, sniper, medic, and warrior, he embodied every quality that elite services demand: strength, precision, and unbreakable focus. It's true. Then we get into the meat and potatoes of this, which, and I do want to say, I'm quoting The Operator Syndrome by Chris Free, a dear friend of mine, and something that we hope to bring all the way to the highest levels of the DoD and make an impact this year or during this administration. And then we have, it goes into chapter one, Incipit. And so this is actually my lectures. I took my lectures and transcribed them and cleaned them up and put them into a book. Lectures of what? Well, the Sleep 101 program. Back in 2021, we had a pilot study, and all I was trying to do was test a light and sound machine that I wanted to get off to the market and save the world with sleep and make a bunch of money and all this stuff. We're testing this light and sound machine, and I thought, how are we going to get people to sit in a chair for long enough for this thing to establish some type of a behavioral pattern, right? That seems impossible, right? So I had to create content. I had to create a schedule. I had to convince people to be a part of this. And what happened was we created a 6-week program with lots of content, all the stuff we mentioned that I learned from close to Tibet, right? Crazy place in the world, or down in Peru in the Amazon. I incorporated all those things. I put together a team, and that 6-week program has changed thousands of lives. And now all of it is in a book. All the secrets are right here. So you can either read this, it's only $10 on Amazon. You have to look up 62 Romeo Sleep 101, just as I put that, because there's a lot of books out there. But you can either read this by itself and improve your life with sleep, or you can use this as a partner companion manual. This is now used as the manual for every student going through the actual course.
So we don't have to reveal everything, Rob. Give us some teasers of
Sure.
practical advice that is in the book.
I think the most interesting and useful pieces of information in 30 seconds that I can give is going to be in the second chapter, which, let's see here, chapter two, Amet, Engineering Your Sleep Dojo. So Amet is just Latin for environment. When we first created this, I created this huge 7-foot map of the journey, and it was kind of based on the Oregon Trail. But we made it like ancient times with castles, and we named all the different castles in Latin terms, and then we followed the trail through each chapter or session of the course, and eventually you reach this renovatio, like this restoration, this goal. So chapter two is Amet and engineering your sleep dojo. So I'll tell you, you can just order the book and read it. If you leave an Amazon review and message me, I will sign a copy of the book and send it to you just as a gift, because I appreciate people taking the time to leave an honest review on there. But for the sleep dojo, basically what we're saying is we're changing the framing of how we look at our bedroom. If it is a dojo, then we show respect as a place of sanctity. We enter into the space of the sleep dojo to accomplish restoration, right? When we think of a dojo, we think of martial arts, we think of respect, we think of patience and silence and learning, but it's a place that we try to improve our life. And in fact, that's what we're trying to do in the bedroom. So a couple of the tips are light, sound, and temperature. You want it cold, dark, and quiet. And I know everyone's heard that, but what we fail to realize in most situations, this comes from my experience, is that people don't really do it, right? If you do take it seriously, you're going to go to Walmart or Amazon or wherever you go, get blackout curtains. You're going to put a piece of duct tape or electrical tape over that LED on the fire alarm. You're going to eliminate all of that light, and then you're going to eliminate all sound. And you're thinking like, well, Rob, I can't eliminate all the sound. Like I'm in a noisy environment. Well, that's why we use white noise. Oh, I don't like white noise. Get over it. Find something that you do like that's smooth and melodic, that increases the volume in the room, that buffers out the noise. Because here's what most people don't know, that noise impacts your brain function and your sleep function. We can measure it in electroencephalography and EEG. You put it on your brain. We can measure your brain, and we can see in the brain waves the sound in the environment. As low as 35 decibels, a spike of 35 decibels can trigger an interruption in your sleep. And so people don't realize that. They think we're totally cut off to the world when we're sleeping. No, actually, those sounds do affect you. So be smart, use white noise, and then, of course, temperature. There's tons of products on the market. Like think of BedJet and Uller and all of these cooling techniques for the bed. It is absolutely critical to regulate the temperature reasonably to get optimal sleep at nighttime. For example, if it's hot in your bedroom, it's going to be difficult to reach homeostasis. Your body's going to work twice as hard. You may sweat. You may struggle with sleep. Not saying you can't sleep, you can, but we're talking about high quality sleep. And then if you are just keeping a solid 70 degrees and you're always indoors, then your body doesn't sense the diurnal change of temperature, meaning it doesn't feel hot in the day and cold at night. That's what we should feel, right? So it's okay to allow things to be warmer in the day and get plenty of sunlight. That's another tip that we can unravel. But then at nighttime, it should be cooler. And our body expects at least a 1 to 2 degree core body temperature drop in order to slip into sleep. And so, of course, you can sleep without all these things, but you're probably going to suffer and have less quality of sleep. So, just doing these little things to in your sleep dojo is absolutely critical. And that's the best, 30-second advice I can give from the book.
Yeah, that's great stuff. So we've got a couple of minutes left. I know you're a man with a lot of different projects going on, and one that I want you to talk about is the Ryan Larkin International Adventure Race because it has a sleep component to it, an
It
adventure race
does.
with a sleep requirement. So explain that to us.
Yeah, thanks for giving me the chance to do that. I'm just doing God's work, man. And that primarily is focused on helping people. But here's the thing, you got to have fun. If you're not having fun, what are you doing? And I know that's not necessarily the case when I'm doing like sort of sleep therapy type of things, but the Ryan Larkin Invitational Adventure Race is all about honoring Ryan Larkin as well as those who have also fallen. So we're going to be here in close to Telluride, Colorado, which is where I'm at now. We're going to muster 10 teams of four. Now, these are fire teams. Just like in the SEAL teams, we have a fire team of four people. We're going to be in military combat fatigues with a fake simulated M4. You have to carry it through the entire course. We're going to say some opening remarks. We're going to do honor push-ups. We're going to have the national anthem. We're going to have the Lord's Prayer, and hopefully we'll get Frank Larkin, the Navy SEAL who is Ryan's father, out here to give his remarks. And in doing so, we hope to raise money for sleep science to help other people like Ryan on this mission that we're on. But 10 fire teams of four, we launch them on in what we call E&E, which is escape and evade, right? Like imagine Operation Red Wings. Everything wrong that could happen does happen. You have to immediately escape the situation. So it's a military simulation. So they're going to be launched into the wilderness and they have to navigate to their first point, right? So imagine being in a denied territory and you get shot off target and everything goes wrong and you have to go, go, go. Okay. Now that begins the race. This is 3 days, 62 miles for 62 Romeo, finishing in Telluride over the course of 3 days. This is intense. 12,000 foot of elevation gain, right? And the whole time you're carrying this M4. If you're a civilian and you want to join a team, oftentimes people have never experienced that. It's a huge pain to carry that weight. It's awkward, right? And so, in doing so, we want to have this military simulation that's a bit of a race. And here's the point that you're bringing up. This adventure race is like no other adventure race ever in history. Why? Because adventure races intentionally sleep deprive to win. They allow a structure within the race so that people, if they want to win, they have to sleep deprive. We're completely against that. We realize that you're going to have to sleep deprive to accomplish the mission in real military operations. We get that. But in this situation, we want to provide a sleep opportunity. So each night, if they make time, they get to their safe zone. They are going to be given until the next morning to sleep. We're going to provide food, we're going to provide refreshments, rehydration. We're going to have the whole thing out there in a big, massive tent that's going to be like a tranquil place for people to get rest. And so when they get their rest the next morning, hopefully they're going to be have their tanks on full. Now we're talking to a number of different companies. We think that Oura Ring might come out and sponsor and measure everyone's fatigue and sleep and performance throughout the entire event. More details to follow on that. But we're getting scientists involved because we want to measure this. This has never been done before. And so we'll have a crazy intense day followed by adequate sleep, followed by we'll launch people in waves based on when they finished will sort of mitigate the accordion effect of these type of races and will kind of launch everybody in the morning. And so everybody will kind of be together. We've got several challenges. It is a points game. Not just the fastest person to the finish is necessarily going to win, but when we do finish, and there's so much to talk about this race, it's so awesome. When we finish in Telluride and we put down those simulated M4s in the back of a truck and pick up those American flags, we're going to march it on in, and I got to tell you, this is going to be a sight to see. I'm not sure if Telluride has ever seen this many American flags and this much patriotism, but this is all in honor of Ryan Larkin and those that we've lost. And it's June 18th through 21st, 2026. I couldn't be more excited. If you want to be a participant, you can go to happycanyonranch.org. And you can find the Ryan Larkin race there. We're constantly updating that page. You can also be a volunteer. Or if you just want to be a donor or support someone else that's doing it, the plan is to have all of this live streamed with live location on a map, leaderboard, everything on our webpage so everyone can follow at home and see this incredible process as it's happening.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like we should have another podcast just talking about the rate about the race. I was honored to prove the course with you
That's
early
right.
this year, and I'm going to take credit for the idea of mandatory sleep. I remember that discussion.
You can have it. You can have it.
Yeah. All right, buddy. It's good to see you. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks, brother. Happy to join you anytime.